Welcome to part 8 of the Clash of Worlds. Now we're going to look at Spanish influence in North America. After the incident between Cortez and Narvaez, Narvaez is going to demand some kind of satisfaction for what happened to him, right? What they're going to do is they're going to give him a grant to settle Florida. Now, the charter that he's given covers the boundary of, Florida as you know it, but it goes all the way and continues on westward to include the entire Texas coast and all the way down into Mexico. It goes to the Rio Panuco River, which is near Tampico, right? So Florida is a lot bigger in this perspective, right? Now, attached to this Narvaez land grant is going to be a man named Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. And he's the important person in this story, right? He's a middle-class bureaucrat of, semi-noble standing, right? But not too high-ranking, because when he got married, he actually took his wife's family name, Cabeza de Vaca, right? Because it was more prestigious than his own. Now, as you know, Cabeza de Vaca means head of the cow, which makes you wonder, what the heck was his family name if head of the cow was better? Okay. So he's attached to this land grant, and his job is twofold. He's to be the second in command to Narvaez, and he's to keep track of the expenses of Narvaez and report any gold found so that the proper taxes are paid. So he's also kind of keeping an eye on Narvaez. Now, Narvaez, like I said, is not the important part of this story. Cabeza de Vaca is, because ultimately what's going to happen in this expedition is Cabeza de Vaca is going to find himself marooned in Texas, in which I like to refer to as the first accidental tourist of Texas. So this expedition seems to be cursed from its very start. As they wintered in the years of 1527 to 1528, getting ready to leave, they lost 140 men just to desertion out of the 600 they had put together. Then they'll lose a bunch of their supplies when a hurricane will roll through the Caribbean. They'll finally set out in April of 1528, and they'll sail to the west coast of Florida, landing near modern-day Tampa Bay, right? There they'll spend 3 months exploring Florida. They'll send their ships in, the ships to go up and down the coast and meet us when we come out here in a few months, okay? Every place they went in Florida, pretty much the Native Americans they ran into were trying to just get them any place but there, right? Get you away from where we are. So they kept telling them of a great kingdom called Appalachia up in the north, right? Now they're referring to an actual Mississippi culture nation that was up there. It's not extremely large, but it's significant enough. But it's not an Inca or Aztec empire. But Cabeza de Vaca is making notes of all this. He's remembering all this stuff, right? So after 3 months, they go up and they're in northern Florida now, and they look for the ships. The ships are nowhere to be found. They're lost to history at this point. Okay, so what do instead? Well, they decide to make some rafts to sail out on the Gulf and makeshift rafts from rough-cut trees. Okay, not a good idea if you ask me, but that's exactly what they're going to do. They make 5 rafts for the 250 men that they have left in their party. And in September 1528, they leave and begin sailing up the coast. Storms eventually hit them, and they're scattered up and down the coast, and they end up washed up on the shores of Texas, right? On November 6, 1528, Cabeza de Vaca becomes the first accidental tourist of Texas when he and his men land on San Luis Island, which they will call Isla de Mahaldo, right? The island of misfortune, okay? They'll land there, and they'll stay there for several years, right? Their numbers will dwindle quickly. I mean, by 1529, there's only 15 of them left, but they'll stay on Mahaldo for about 4 years, and during that time, Cabeza de Vaca will be a merchant, he'll be a doctor, he'll be a slave with the local Native Americans around there. Finally, in 1532, he and the one last survivor will decide that they're going to try and walk down the coast and find their way to some kind of Spanish settlement, right? Now, his companion will get lost. He'll actually get scared. He'll run back towards Mahaldo. We'll never hear about him again. But in his treks, he will run across some other explorers. He'll run across Alonso Castilla Maldonado, Andreas Dornetes de Carranza, and a slave named Estevanico. He also went by Esteban, right? And the four of them will be captured by Cohilticans and be made slaves. Now, they'll escape in September of 1534. And the band will now wander through the American Southwest and Mexico for several years until finally in 1536 they'll come across the Pacific coast city of Culiacan, right? After 8 years of wandering, they're finally back in Mexico City, right? Now, the thing that makes this most significant, besides the fact that they went through a bunch of areas that were never seen before, Estevanico was probably the first African to ever see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas. They were probably the first one to ever see bison, because they referred to the humanos as cow people, which they might have been referring to bison, right? But Cabeza de Vaca had made mental notes of all this stuff that he saw, and he wrote a book about it called Relacion. And Relacion talks about all these things they saw on this expedition, and it talks about the large kingdom of Appalachia that's supposed to have a bunch of gold, and that's going to motivate De Soto to go into that region later. And it's going to talk about the possibility that he believes he saw one of the 7 cities of Cibola, right? One of the 7 cities of gold when he was in the what is the Pueblo region. He's probably seen adobe off in the distance, but still, right? Relacion is going to, at the time, inspire other conquistadors to follow, and it's still useful today because now we use it, and it's the best account that we have of first contact with Texas Native American groups like Caddo and Karankawa. One of these people who were inspired by Relacion was Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, a conquistador who in 1540 decided that he was going to find that city of Cibola described, right? Now, he had hoped to use Estevanico to help guide them into the region, but he had been purchased a year before by a man named Fray Marcos de Niza, who was a priest, and he used him as a guide to explore New Mexico, and Estevanico was killed by Zuni Indians, right? But he's going to explore up into the Pueblos. Now, he never finds the city of Cibola, obviously, because it's not there. But what he does find is he finds the Pueblo Indians. He establishes Spanish contact with them. He sees the Grand Canyon. He's the first Spaniard to see the Grand Canyon. He and his men are. But again, no gold. He's looking for the gold. He's looking for that gold, glory, and God in that order. Finally, late in his expedition, he's going to run across a Plains Indian named Truck, who was a slave, along with another Plains Indian named Yosopi in the Pueblos. Truck says, yeah, my hometown of Quivira is actually a large kingdom with a lot of gold. You should go there. I'll take you. And so Coronado takes Truck with him to find Quivira. Now, of course, Truck's lying. He's hoping just to get there and escape and get home. He's just trying to get out of the situation he was in. Well, he put himself in a worse one. Once Coronado reaches the Great Plains and realizes and gets to Quivira and realizes that there's no gold there, he's going to kill Truck, and he's ultimately going to return home empty-handed, right? But the attitude, though, is going to begin shifting as far as how these Native Americans are being treated by these conquistadors right about the time that these last major expeditions are taking place. So by the 1540s, priests like Bartolome de las Casas, who have the king's ear, is going to begin saying, look, we need to do something about these conquistadors, right? They got this all wrong. They're going for the 3 G's, you know, gold, glory, God, but they're doing it in that order. And really what they're doing is gold, glory, and yeah, God, if we got a little bit of time, right? God should be first. So people like Bartolome de las Casas convinces the king to adopt a new system. He'll pass the new laws of 1542, which is going to create the mission system. The mission system for the king is a win-win-win situation. 3 wins. Okay. Win number 1 is the establishment of presidios. So instead of having large armies led by conquistadors, which are expensive, You have a smaller presidio with a smaller contingency of military in it, right? Not quite as expensive. And then their job is to protect a whole series of missions that are established near the different nations, the different Native American nations. And then these missions have priests which convert them to Christianity. So win one, it's cheaper. Win number two, now you have these missions set up converting these people to Catholicism. You're doing the work of God. Win number two, right? And the third thing is that if you do convert a Native American nation to Catholicism, then you can make them Spanish citizens. And once they're Spanish citizens, you can tax them. That's win number three. Win, win, win. Yeah, it rarely worked, right? Because honestly, Native Americans pretty much all said, hey, look, we got our religion. We're not interested in yours. And what was made worse is a lot of times they already have their religions that they believe in. These missions are set up, and of course they brought with them disease and things like that. How good of a selling point is that for your religion when you show up saying, hey, I want you to convert to our religion, and everybody around you starts dropping dead? So it was pretty problematic, and it really didn't work out very well. Juan de Oñate certainly didn't have the people's best interest in heart when he set up his presidios and missions around the Acoma Pueblo in 1598. He was sent out there in 1595 by King Philip II to convert the Acoma Pueblo and the regional pueblos to Catholicism. The Acoma numbered only about 6,000, and again, they weren't very interested in converting to Christianity. Oñate could be rather harsh and cruel, and so what ended up happening is actually they revolted. The Acoma people revolted, and in the process of the rebellion, they killed Juan de Oñate's nephew, which ended up being a huge mistake. Juan de Oñate, who visualized himself as a wannabe conquistador, decided to take a conquistador's revenge. He had his men attack the city, the Acoma Pueblo, and he had them kill the first 500 people they came in contact with. Men, women, children, didn't matter. After that was done, he rounded up another 500 and he sold them off to slavery in the Caribbean. Of those who remained, he then rounded up the 24 most able-bodied men and he cut off their right foot as a lesson to everyone else of what happens when you resist Spanish rule. So, an interesting side note to this was that in January of 1998, the 400th anniversary of Juan de Oñate's arrival approached, right? And vandals attacked his statue outside of Espanola, New Mexico, this statue you see here. What did they do to the statue? Well, they cut off its right foot. And they left a little placard by it that said, fair is fair, right? Now, the city government of Espanola quickly had a new foot cast and welded back on and restored everything in time for the festivities of the 400th anniversary. But for several years, that foot was lost, that original foot, until it actually showed up in a guy's garage many years later. And he's going to catch some heat for having this foot, even though he wasn't involved with the initial theft.